So it seems like we've been able to fill out these fields, and our next question is, what is the technical term to describe the first physical sector in a partition? Okay, so what we're looking right now is, this is of course the boot sector FAT32, and this is the template that's available with WinHex, and of course this template was applied to the sector that we were able to locate on the drive. Okay, at this specific sector number, and of course it clearly corresponds to the position of the deleted partition that was already showing us earlier by our tool itself. Right, so I would say that we're looking at the boot sector, and then we can of course say that this is also known as volume boot record, or VBR, or also known as boot sector. So all of these terms, volume boot record, VBR, or boot sector, can be used to describe this first sector in a specific partition where an actual file system is residing. All right, so then it's asking us what kind of link exists between a master boot record and the volume boot record. So you can describe it in your own terms. I could say this as MBR has a partition entry which has a pointer or field that is specifying the physical sector of the volume boot record of the corresponding partition. Okay, so that's something that we could put down here. Next question is, what is the physical sector number of FAT32 VBR copy on this disk? So I'll go back to my notes and specify here that if you go to the location of the boot sector, which is the one that we're looking at right now, which of course is this number, and if you take this +6, this is the copy of VBR on FAT32, right? So it's a volume boot record. So this is the sector number of the volume boot record +6 equals the location of this copy. Okay, so this is VBR copy. Okay, and so of course if you add 6, this is the value, so I'll try to specify it here. And now let's just quickly check that that's really the case. Basically, we need to see the copy of this information if we jump to position and go to sector, and now specify this sector that we just computed, and just click OK. And here it is. It's just like an exact copy. And so this is the location of the backup copy of VBR on FAT32. Okay, so next question, number 27. What is the MBR partition table? So of course you can search for this information online and find your own definition. I would say that partition table is located inside the master boot record, and the partition table contains 4 partition entries. And if you were to use all 4 partitions, you could either have 4 primary partitions or 3 primary partitions and 1 extended partition. Because remember, the limitation of MBR structure is only 4 partitions. So if you need more partitions, you have to make 1 extended partition, and then inside extended partition, you can have extended partition table, which will provide access to additional extended partitions on the drive. So just describe in your own terms how would you specify what MBR is. Okay, so number 28, where does partition table begin inside the MBR? And again, this is part of our documentation. It's all official. You can see that the first partition entry is located at decimal offset 446. So we know this. It's by design. Okay, so we know this from documentation. So we can just copy and paste this answer right here. What is the size of the partition table? Well, each partition entry is 16 bytes, so this would be 64 bytes, right? So the size, the measurement is 64 bytes. And what is partition record? Partition record contains information, right? So this is next challenge, number 30. Partition record contains information about one of the partitions on disk. Contains bootable flag, right? We can just jump back to the beginning and say view template manager and go back to our master boot record template and apply this. This is the first sector. You can see that this is our partition entry, and it's also known as partition record. So tells us whether the partition is bootable, the starting and ending cylinder head sector address. We can actually compute everything in these terms. The partition type, okay, so this field is partition type, and in our reference document we have those partition types specified here, so you can see how much of variety of different partitions you can have, so we have two of these. We have FAT32 and we have NTFS in our example. So what else? Of course, the partition type is part of the partition record, and the starting logical block address and the size of the partition and sectors. So just describe a combination of fields which is available here. The size of partition record is 16 bytes. Okay, so we have 4 of them, so 64 bytes is the entire partition table, and partition record is 16 bytes, like this. What does it mean to say active partition? An active partition means that the partition is bootable. Okay, so that's just a technical term for bootable partition. Active partition, from where the operating system can boot. What's primary partition? Okay, so primary partition, so that's number 33, may contain an operating system, and there can be only a maximum of 4 primary partitions, as they correspond to these partition table entries or partition records. Or we can have up to 3 primary partitions and 1 extended partition. In fact, in our situation here, we have 1 primary partition and 1 extended partition, but there could be up to 3 primary partitions maximum, all 4 without extended. So that's the possibility. So primary partitions are the only ones allowed to be marked as bootable, and only 1 primary partition can be marked as active. So that's pretty much everything I can think about right now, saying information about a primary partition. And what's an extended partition? So an extended partition can be used to bypass the master boot record limitation of only 4 partition entries, right? So that's the idea of the extended partition, and that's why it's called extended, because it extends this structure right here. So an extended partition can be used to bypass MBR limitation of 4 partitions, and it's basically acting as a container which may have any number of logical partitions, and logical partitions are the same as primary partitions except that you cannot boot from them. And in our case, this is the example. The second partition, FAT32, it's an example of extended partition. So here we have a pretty good view of the recovered partition, and it is visible very well in both FTK Imager and WinHex tool. So the next logical question is, where is the first data cluster of this FAT32 system, right? So this is just the boot sector, but can we also manually locate the first data cluster on the system? Basically, the cluster that contains the information that may be visible to the end user in a File Explorer window. So we will be able to find out, and this will bring us to the next laboratory exercise, b24, where we'll be finding the first data cluster in this same image, Bonnie Parker's FAT32 deleted partition. Just remember to save your changes and submit when you're ready, and of course post your questions on the discussion board if you need some help, and I would encourage everyone to jump in and respond to questions if you know the answer.